Hello, it's Lromanosky from Calgary, Canada. I'm shooting from the lug nuts facility, and the vehicle we have in front of me here is, of course, a familiar sight on today's roads, the Tesla Model 3. This particular car is a Tesla Model 3 Performance from 2019. And just looking around, it occurs to me that we've got some examples of some really iconic cars here. Aidan can shoot the Land Rover, which he's leaning against, which would have come out in 1948, and the quintessential utility vehicle and the precursor to the sport utility vehicle. Swing the camera over this way, you can see a couple beautiful Jaguar E-types, and if you come back over here, we've got one of the third generation Mercedes SLs, a Willys Jeepster, and Ken's working on a BMW M5, and that's a Porsche 996 Turbo. So in this part of the shop, we actually have a bunch of really significant cars that for one reason or another kind of earned their place in the, some of the most important cars, in the last, 150 years, 140 years of the automobile. So we'll break this video up into sections. We will start with a little bit about Tesla and the Model 3, although there's better sources for that than me, but we'll give you some context as to the model. We'll go around and we'll do, our usual thorough walk-around video. Which is, the intent in that is basically to pick up any imperfections in the car. There are very few with this one. We'll go have a look at the interior, the front and rear trunks, etc. We'll look at all of that, and then we will also take it for a drive. Again, there's not really too much to talk about with the drive, the way it drives anyway. Teslas are fast, they're smooth, they're quiet. But we'll at least demonstrate that everything works, and I'll run a commentary with that. We'll do a paint meter of the car so we can ascertain whether it has the original paint or not. It does, but we'll verify that. Have a close look at the tires and wheels and so forth. Okay, so we'll break the video into sections, and you can, if all you care about is the paint depth to make sure it's original paint and you already know everything about Tesla, then just skip ahead. The Model 3 came out in 2017, and this was the volume car. This is what certainly all the investors were waiting for. This was the first mainstream EV that I would say was commercially viable. It certainly saved the company. There would be no Tesla if it were not for the Model 3. And its close cousin is the Model Y. They share basically the same skateboard chassis, although there's different suppliers for batteries and so on, but it's essentially the same electrical platform. So without those two cars, there would be no Tesla. They certainly wouldn't have survived on the Roadsters or the Model S. And they've gone on to produce over 1 million of these per year. I think a Model Y was the world's best-selling car in 2023 with, I think, 1.3 million copies sold. So, Tesla not only redefined electric cars with the Model S and the Model 3, they redefined automobile production as well. Vertically integrated company, making a lot of the stuff themselves, not bringing in too much from outside suppliers. That really saved them during the COVID and the supply chain shortages during the pandemic. Tesla and BYD were kind of the two manufacturers that actually survived that because they were vertically integrated. Other manufacturers, Porsche comes to mind, that had a global network of component suppliers shipping their different parts just in time, just in place, converging in the middle of a city in Germany, had a terrible time during COVID, and with the Ukrainian war, their assembly line just ground to a halt. Tesla and BYD barely flinched. But anyway, whatever you think of the man, Elon Musk made more of an impact in global automotive production than any other CEO since probably Henry Ford in the early part of the 20th century. Musk basically redefined the electric car, the modern electric car. Not that electric cars were new, because electric cars were probably a third of automobile production in 1900, where the combustion engine cars were quite primitive. Electric start hadn't been invented yet, and they were quite noisy. So electric cars in 1900 to, let's say, 1910 were thought as a more genteel form of transportation, because they didn't break your arm when you tried to start it, and because they were much quieter. Fast forward to 2007 maybe, and then we saw, the first Tesla Roadster concept. I remember seeing it at Burning Man, the Burning Man festival in the Black Rock Desert. We were not allowed to have any advertising, but they had a carbon fiber Tesla without any badging, just sitting in the middle of the desert. And then Tesla came out with their Roadster in, I think, 2010, and they made, I don't know, 2,500 of those or so on. But they were going to come out with their sedan, the Model S. I remember seeing the prototypes for that, the pre-production cars at Concorso Italiano, actually, I think, in Monterey in maybe 2010. It and the Fisker were there as concepts, the Model S. And then fast forward to 2014, maybe 2015, and I was with Porsche then, and we had various sales meetings where all the sales managers and the salesmen would go get training. And then Porsche's making a lot of money back then. I guess they are still today, and they'd put on like this lavish presentation and so on. So we'd fly into some fancy resort near Salt Lake City. Can't remember the name of it. Super fancy resort, and they had 20 or 30 Panameras lined up, and they just debuted the Panamera plug-in hybrid, and they showed all the Panameras, including the Turbo and Turbo S, and they had competitor cars for us to drive. And so didn't know too much about a Tesla Model S then. This is one of the very first ones, and we got to try it alongside the Panamera Turbo S. And I think I must have known that Teslas were fast, but Porsche's always had the fastest cars. Our Turbo S Panamera had 550 horsepower and dual clutch transmission and four-wheel drive, and in any standing start test, a Turbo S Porsche always kind of dusted everything. And so I went to the guys, the trainers who were trained by Porsche, to explain the new models to all the sales guys and sales managers. And I remember talking to them, and I'm like, oh yeah, well, I guess this is fast, referring to the Model S. And he said, well, we can keep up to it if we use launch control. And I'm like, what? You can keep up to it, but only if you use launch control? I couldn't believe it. Like, Porsches were always the fastest cars. And then I got inside and looked at the big iPad, and it had Google Earth navigation. And at Porsche and everybody else, we had these tiny little screens, and maybe they were touch screens, but they were only 5 or 6 inches wide or whatever. That's all we had. We thought they were fine. Nobody had any different. And I looked at this, whatever it was, 11 by 17 tablet, and I was like, oh my God, that changes everything. Every other infotainment on every other car just looks stupid now. It's like you just have those moments where it's like, oh my God, this changes everything. All right, so that was my first, and then we got in the Tesla, and put your foot down, and it's just like, oh my goodness, this is, I mean, to get the Porsche Turbo S $250,000 car, I mean, you had to stand on the brake and put it in traction control and bounce the thing off the limiter and and then let the thing go, and then the wheels would chirp and it would get itself together, and then it would be some turbo lag, and then all of a sudden it would pick up and go. With a Tesla, you need to step on the accelerator, you're just gone. It just really made everything look slow. Now, okay, so they come out with a Model 3 in 2017, and they have versions. They have a small battery and a big battery. They have single single axle driving, one motor in the axle for rear-wheel drive. They also have two or all-wheel drive with 2 electric motors. This is a dual motor. So you can get it in smaller big battery and 2 or all-wheel drive. And so the big battery is called the long range. There's the regular one, there's the long range, and this is the performance. So the performance has different motors. It puts out close to 500 horsepower. It's like 475 or something like that. You get tuned suspension, you get bigger brakes, you get red brake calipers, 20-inch wheels, a little bit of different trim, and the MSRP on this was $86,000. Although it's less now, Musk took about 10 grand off the price of this car. Okay, so to replace this car right now is, I think, 76 and change plus GST. Okay, so let's just have a look at the Monroney sheet here. You want to come here, Aiden? Okay, so it's a Model 3 long-range all-wheel drive with the performance package. Base price was $45,000. $35,700 was the premium for the performance dual motor all-wheel drive. We've got the premium interior, the red multi-coat paint, $2,600. The performance wheels are included. Base autopilot is included. Oh no, the $1,300 is for the interior. So I don't know what premium interior is, but the white interior was extra. Performance upgrade, pedals, carbon fiber spoiler, that's all included. We get to a base price before freight and PDI of $85,600, and then we add that, and this car also has an extra set of 20-inch winter wheels and tires. So you're $90,000 plus GST. We have a dock fee in there. So we're pushing 100 grand, writing a check for 100 grand for this car. 16 kilowatt hours to go 100 kilometers. I get down to 14 in the city and 18 on the highway. So I think that number is actually quite conservative. You should do a little bit better than that. And like I said, the average on this car right now is, what is it? 16 and a half, I think. Okay, so that's the average we're getting. Now, it doesn't tell you how big the battery is, and it doesn't tell you what the total battery capacity is or what the usable battery capacity is, but it's understood to be about 75 kilowatt hours, and probably around 70 kilowatt hours is usable. So if you take, for instance, consumption of, let's say, 15 kilowatt hours per 100 kilometers, and you divide that into 70, you're going to get like 4.5 or something like that. That times 100 is your range. So that's like 450 kilometers of range. Okay, does that make sense? So if you're using 15 kilowatt hours per 100 kilometers, okay, and you've got 70 kilowatt hours in the battery pack, then it's 7 divided by 15. So how many times does 15 go into 70? And that's going to be, I guess, 4 2/3 or something like that. Got my math. I hate doing math on these things because I get it wrong, but 466 would be the number, hopefully, if I'm doing that right. So, and that's about what the car says, and that's about what you get, and that's about, when you see these cars being range tested, what they do get. Okay, so that's where it comes from. If you try to go fast, you'll get, on the 110, 120, you'll get in this car, 18 or even 19. So that'll eat into the range. If you're in the city and you get, 14 liters per 100 kilometers, so then you'll get more than 500 kilometers of range in the city. Okay. Consistent. Now, when it comes to charging, you've got 70 kilowatt hours of capacity to charge. Okay. So when you go to, use the outlet, the 120 outlet in the wall, that gives you 1 kilowatt basically. So if you drive 100 kilometers in the city every day in your commute, and you're going to be using around 14 kilowatt hours for every 100 kilometers, okay? So at the end of every day, you'll need to replenish 14 kilowatt hours. Well, if that plug over there, or maybe show the one going into the Mini. So that's an example of our Mini, George's Mini, getting charged at 120, okay? So it's delivering a kilowatt to that Mini Cooper, right? Well, if you did to both cars, it's the same. So if you plugged the car in for 14 hours, you would then replenish the 14 kilowatt hours that you just used, okay? So that's plugging it in at 120, which you can actually do with a Tesla Model 3 because the consumption is actually so reasonable. I mean, so, if you get home from work and you plug this car in at 6 at night, and you don't leave until 8 the next morning, that's most of the energy that you're going to consume if you drive 100 kilometers, but you'll probably drive less than that. So in effect, really, if you plug a Tesla in overnight at 120, you stand a very good chance of never having to go to a supercharger or install a 240 wall box with a level 2 charger. So that is, with a Tesla Model 3, I wouldn't do that with a Hummer, but with a Tesla Model 3, you can actually do it. Now, if you have a place for it and you wire the 240 in, you give it like a 50 amp service, okay? Then, because you only take 80% of that, you get 40 amp to the car, and the 40 amps times 240 volts will give you the kilowatts to this car, and so 4896. That'll give you almost 10 kilowatts of power to the car. Now, that means that if you drove 100 kilometers, you used 14 kilowatt hours, and now you're plugging it into something that's giving you almost 10 kilowatts, well, you're plugging that in for only an hour and a half, okay? So almost no time at all. If you ran the battery right to zero and you used 500 kilometers, and now it's at zero, and you had to charge by 120, well, then it's 70 hours to fill it from zero all the way up to full. But you're probably never going to do that. Like, if you're going to drive 500 kilometers in one stint, you're going to use a supercharger, or you're going to plug it in at a level 2 charger. You're not going to plug it in at 120. Okay, but if you did run it all the way to zero, you'd be plugging it in for 70 hours in a 120 volt. If you had a level 2 50 amp breaker, 40 amps to the car, the watts equals the amps times the volts. You take the 40 amps times 240 volts, you get what is that, 9.6, okay. So then you get 9.6 kilowatts to the car, and you're trying to put in 70 kilowatt hours. Well, you got 7 or 8 hours of charging. So you could run this thing for 500 kilometers, put it in your garage, plug it in, and it would be full by the next morning with a level 2 charger, 240 amp service, 240 volt service with 50 amps, okay? Does that make sense? Now, if you went to a supercharger, okay, so these are not every charger is even remotely the same. There's lots of chargers along in and around the city and parkades and stuff that only give you 10 amps, okay? There's fast chargers, DC fast chargers that might give you, 10 amps, 10 kilowatts, okay? There's DC fast chargers that might give you 50 kilowatts, but the big ones that are on the highway, the Tesla superchargers, like the big Petro-Canada ones, that are like every 100 kilometers apart or something, those go up to 350 kilowatts. So those are called the superchargers. So if you pull this one into a supercharger, you're going to get somewhere between 100 and 200 kilowatts out of it. That's a confusing subject because every session on an electric charger, on a high-powered charger, is going to be thermally managed, and each session is going to have a charge curve, and it's going to charge fast at a low state of charge if you bring it in with like 20% state of charge, and then when it gets to 100 or close to 100, it really throttles back the kilowatts that the car gets. Okay, so that's a different discussion. But if you brought this Tesla to a supercharger, you're probably going to get an average of somewhere between 100 and 125 kilowatts, like an average for the session. You're probably going to bring it in with 20% and charge it 20 to 80%. And if you did that, you're under a half an hour. Okay, so this car on the highway is going to use 17, 18 kilowatt hours per 100 kilometers. If you drove it for 3 hours, it's going to use 50 or 55 kilowatts of energy. If you pulled in and you're going to go 300 kilometers because you're going 100 kilometers an hour, you're going to pull in to charge it, you go to the supercharger, and you're going to replace 55, maybe 60 kilowatt hours of electricity. You're probably going to get that at around 120 kilowatts. That's going to take you about a half an hour of charging. So you're going to be driving for, around 3 hours, stopping, charging for a half an hour. And those are reliable numbers at any Tesla supercharger. They really have it nailed. All you do is, you click the button on the charger, the charge port opens, you stick it in, and the car just does the rest, okay? So Tesla really looked at charging and efficiency and basically going from A to B in an electric car in a holistic manner, and came up with a really efficient car that doesn't use a lot of energy to travel. And then when it's time to stop, then it has a very high power superchargers which work and which charge the battery quickly. So you can go from place to place, from city to city, and not be unduly waiting around, waiting for your car to charge. And they nailed that. And nobody else has, which is why Ford and Mercedes and Hyundai are all trying to adapt the Tesla charging network, because what exists for those cars, the CCS, doesn't work very well. Okay, it's very spotty. It can work well, but it's not going to do it every time on every charging station. So there's a anxiety about whether or not it's going to charge your car properly. Some people might ask, well, how often was it fast charged? And there's some evidence that an excessive diet of, like, if a battery only ever got fast charged, it would be a little bit harder on the battery than one that didn't. I think he's used the fast charger like twice on this, and I used it once, and its whole life it's been fast charged like 3 times. Car journalists just go on about range like it's the only important thing. Anybody who owns an EV and drives an EV and has personal experience with an EV doesn't have any range anxiety, or at least it's not very common. So people who know EVs, drive EVs, and understand EVs know it's not about range. You buy the car, you might worry about that before you buy the car. As soon as you buy the car, you forget about range. The car has enough range. People only drive between 60 and 100 kilometers a day. This thing has a range pushing 500 kilometers. On the EVs that I've driven, the battery never even gets below 50% in normal use. Okay, range is like completely overstated in my opinion. But if you don't have a Tesla, the charging station infrastructure, that anxiety is understated. It's almost never mentioned. And the other thing that's really never really given a lot of press is the difference in efficiency between the cars, and the metric that I think is the most important, which I almost never, or basically never hear about on any of the articles about EVs that I read that drive me kind of nuts, is the ratio between consumption and average charge rate. So how much energy is the car going to use when it's going somewhere, and then how much charge is it going to accept when you get to the charging station? So, people just talk about range. But if you have, and they confuse range with efficiency and say, oh, the car only has this much range, it's not very efficient. Well, the range and efficiency are two totally separate topics. You can give any EV a lot of range. You just put a gargantuan battery in it and you'll get lots of range. That doesn't mean it's efficient. In fact, it could be the inverse of that, because the big battery weighs a lot, and the weight, of course, affects the kilowatt hours per 100 kilometers that the car is going to get, because it has to push more weight down the road. Okay, so we'll do more videos on that subject. Should try to stick to this thing here. But suffice to say that a Model 3 is the most compelling choice beyond a shadow of a doubt for buying an electric car to travel long distances. There's nothing that even, except a Lucid. A Lucid is good too. But those two cars are virtually it when it comes to long distance travel, because of the efficiency they have to propel themselves down the road at 100 kilometers an hour. This will use 15, 16, 17, 18 kilowatt hours per 100 kilometers. The Lucid will do a little bit better than that. And it'll also charge between 100 and 200 kilowatts. And a Lucid actually is better than that too. So a Lucid is probably the champ at that, but they're over $100,000. For a mainstream car, this is it, and that explains why, at least if you talk about the parts of not China, it really has completely dominant in the marketplace, and those are the reasons. Okay, so I think that's about the longest preamble that I've ever done on a car video, but it's the first electric car I've done. It kind of needs that context before I get into the car. So this particular Model 3 is, it was bought new by a guy who was an early adopter of EVs. He had a Tesla Model S, and I think a Model X before this one. He bought it new in Calgary. He never did anything to it. He kept taking it to the dealer and saying, well, do you want to check my car over? Does it need anything? And they were like, no, it doesn't need anything. So it never had any repairs. It never had any warranty work. He bought new tires for it. And that's it. That's it. There's nothing else to the story on it. It was never hit, no insurance claims, no paint work, no accidents, no warranty work. It's on its original windshield. It's not scraped up, it's not marked up, it's basically impossible to reasonably fault. We'll go through it now just to demonstrate that, but basically you never did anything to it. It just worked. Okay, but let's bring the camera close and we'll just show you what marks there are on the car. It's in Calgary. Calgary has rocks on the road. Every car has stone chips. This is very minor. They've been touched up. There's just a smattering on the hood and on the front bumper cover. From 3 feet away, you're not going to notice anything. Under fluorescent lights, perfectly clean with a camera there, you can see that there are some minor stone chips that have been touched up. The windshield is the original windshield. And we can see, some minor little pits. Nothing that's distracting. The worst is there, which is not in your line of sight. And it's not cracked and it won't spread, so you don't need to replace the windshield, but it is there. Other than that, I really struggle to pick out any flaws in the car. All the alloys look pretty good. Brakes, of course, you're never going to have to worry about those, basically, because you drive this car with one pedal using the brake regen. The tires, it does eat tires, there's no question about that. And the performance version has the Pilot Sport 4S. That's the same as you'll get on a 911 Porsche. And It's gone through one set already, and it'll of course go through the rears faster. And so we're at, I'm going to say 50% in the rears. And what are we at in the fronts? I think more than that. About 75% in the fronts remaining, and 50% in the rears. There's also a winter set of a wheel tire package that goes with the car, and yeah, with 470 horsepower and I think almost as much torque, you're gonna if you want to, you can really roast the tires. I keep it in chill mode. I've driven enough fast stuff that I don't care anymore. Show your friend one day how fast it goes, and then turn it to chill and not worry about it. I find it more fun to drive with efficiency in mind. And actually, with all the average on this car of 16.5 kilowatt hours per 100 kilometers, those sticky tires and big wheels don't do it any favors. You'd probably give up, I'm going to say 5-10% getting the performance wheel and tire package, and also the impact aerodynamics because they're a little bit wider. But that's what this is. It's a performance version, and it's not just a one-trick pony. It handles really nicely too. But anyway, the wheels, I don't think there's any curb rash. Maybe there's one mark on one. I think I recall one mark. Maybe not. Oh, it's got a couple little things on it, but generally excellent shape for the wheels. There's no door dings. There's no scratches. There's no marks on the bumper. The underside of the spoiler is still nice. Nobody's going to be disappointed with the condition of the car. I would go so far as to say it is impossible to reasonably fault for its year and mileage. Okay. By that, I'll bring out my paint meter. This is calibrated in micrometers. It's 1/1000th of a millimeter. Factory paint depth is in the hundreds somewhere, anywhere from 100 to 200. Some cars, like the Japanese cars, are closer to 100. They have thinner paint, and the European cars can, be closer to 200. But we're looking for consistency. Repaint is, in the 3s and 4s usually, 300, 400. If it has PPF on the front, a layer of PPF is about the same thickness as a coat of paint. So PPF, it doesn't have PPF, but if it did, it would be in the 3s as well. So let's just go see what it says here. 130, 132, 128, 184, 137. Now the paint, 99. When it gets painted, the paint will flow to different contours and so on. So we'll get very slight differences, which is normal. 171, 148, 149, 158, 157, 146, 147, 131. Actually, it's worth noting that at 150, the paint on this is more consistent than average, I would say. Less variation. 172, probably only, I'm only seeing I guess a low of 100 and a high of 170. So, 1/10 of a millimeter difference. That's actually really quite consistent. 133, 162, 163. Okay, so we have unquestionably original paint. We have a clean Carfax, no insurance claims, no hail claims, no front bumper replacements, nothing. The wheels haven't been refinished. The interior hasn't been touched up. It's needed zero reconditioning. Didn't do anything to this car except touch up a few stone chips and clean it. Okay, it wasn't a beat up car that we reconditioned through a bunch of miracle products or something. This is just the way we got the car. Of course, it was always garaged. Inside the car, well, it's got white seats. You know, so the first thing you do is look for any discoloration from jeans and so forth, dye on clothes, and it's excellent. I mean, I suppose you can see a little bit there, but we didn't even try to clean that, did we? We just wiped it down. We didn't even use any leather cleaner on it. It's a synthetic leather, by the way. Actually, I even think that little bit can wipe off. So sometimes the cars will get scuffed up with the sills. You know, if you're wearing hiking boots and gravel and stuff gets in there, this can get marked up. It isn't. You know, sometimes the steering wheel can get marked up with rings and so on. It isn't. So that kind of piano black finish on the center console, that is easy to scratch. And so if you throw your keys or something on there, you can scratch it easily. It isn't. The touchscreen works perfectly. You know, it just works fine. It's not gunked up with fingerprints. No issues on the glass hardtop. There were probably, like, I've driven my kids to school in this 3 or 4 times. That's probably the only time anybody's ever been in the back of the car. You know, so it was you know, older businessmen and not feeding kids Cheerios in the back. If we open the trunks, all right. Okay, so that's the. All right, so we see the charge port, and we have the little Tesla logo that glows green when you plug it in. We have the carbon fiber spoiler. I didn't mention that. That's part of the performance package. The gentleman who owned it, you know, didn't haul a lot of things and had other vehicles to do that anyway. So I don't even think anything's ever been there. I mean, sometimes, you know, people have golf clubs and so on, and they can get marked up on the, you know, this area can be scratched. And often you put PPF on that to prevent it. So this car doesn't have any PPF, but there's no marks on that at all. There's no evidence that anything's like kind of ever been in there. And then we have this well here, which is a considerable size. And again, it doesn't look like anything's ever been put in there. This material isn't too durable. Like it'll stain really easy. It's just like a, you know, it's just like a kind of a fabric or a felt covered board. And so it doesn't take much to make a mess of that and looks basically brand new. We can go through here again, and you know, I don't think it's ever had I'm sure I didn't put a child seat in there, but sometimes seats can get marked up from child seats, or they can get you know, indented where there were child seats, okay, and this one isn't. Sometimes if these seats are folded flat and like a heavy item is placed in the trunk, like tires or something, like wheels and tires, then, you know, the seat belt compresses against the foam, and there can be different indentations and signs of wear in the rear, and we don't see any of that at all. You know, there's very rare that anybody's ever sat in the passenger seat in the car. Like it's like an executive-owned, garaged, you know, only 45,000 kilometers in 5 years, and this owner I've known for a while. I sold him a 911 Porsche as well, so we had that to use in the summer. It came from a good home. Let me just say that. From a guy who knows a thing or two about electricity, actually. Okay, so in the front, this didn't look like it had ever even been opened, and this still had its original tag on it, and I think I was the first person to ever use that. And this is the this is the 120 volt outlet that you'd use to plug into your home socket, and then that is an adapter for the CCS network. So that's Tesla on that side, that's CCS. And so you just plug this into the end of the CCS adapter, and then you can charge your car at any of the CCS stations, although I don't know why you'd want to do that because they don't really work that well. But if you wanted to, you could. It's another option for you. We don't see any markings on the underside of the hood. And, well, there's just nothing much to talk about in the front here. That is about it. Okay, so we'll do the driving video of the Tesla Model 3. Now, normally when we do these driving videos, we back the car out, make sure it's cold, we start it up, get Aiden to shoot the exhaust, see if anything comes out of the exhaust, like it's running too rich or it's black or blue or whatever it is. We go to the engine, we listen for valve train noise, we listen for knocking from the bottom end, we listen for the ancillary noises from the alternator and the water pump and so on, and we see if there's any squeaking, and we look for leaks to see if it's leaking coolant or leaking oil or doing this or doing that or whatever. And we go through this whole thing to try to reassure people that the combustion engine is operating properly, and any number of the 100 things in it aren't defective or whatever. Okay, so there's just none of that here. There's nothing to show, and even if I could get access to the electric motors, there's no point in doing it. So that just goes to some of the advantages of an EV, and particularly a used EV. It's just like there's none of that stuff to go wrong. So we'll do a drive video, but there's a billion Model 3 road tests and reviews out there on the net. So I could go and show you how fast it accelerates, or how to make the car fart, or play around with some of the goofy sort of whimsical touches and so on. But you've seen all that before, so I'm not going to bother. What kind of value can I add? Well, I've owned an Ioniq 5 for a year, and then I was the lead on the Porsche Taycan when we unveiled that in 2019 when I worked for Porsche. And then I've driven, I published a buyer's guide on EVs and went into all the specs and sort of all of them. So I can probably give more context as to how it differs from other EVs, which might be more might be more interesting than just have me do the usual Model 3 stuff. But we'll go for a drive just to demonstrate that it works, and maybe I'll point out a few things. I'm not going to try to go fast or whatever. Okay, so we can see the consumption here. This is the predictive range left when I have 84% of the battery. Okay, so you can extrapolate what 100% looks like over 500. So we can look at this graph here. It's showing that I've got 413 kilometers of projected range with 84% left in the battery. Okay, so you can extrapolate that if I had 100% left in the battery, I'd get over 500. And you can also see that I've been averaging 145 watt hours per kilometer over the last 50 kilometers. So that's, just convert that to kilowatt hours per 100 kilometers, 14.5, okay? So 14.5 kilowatt hours per 100 kilometers. And then, we're dividing that 14.5 into about 84% of the 70 kilowatt hours of usable battery. And if you take the 14.5 and you divide it into 70 kilowatt hours, you get about, times it by 100, you get something close to that. So those were their numbers. Does that make sense? To go 100 kilometers, we're going to use 14.5 kilowatt hours, okay? But we're going 400 kilometers. So 14.5 times 4, whatever, is close to 60. If we take 84% of the battery with its usable, that's 70 kilowatt hours. Okay, 84% of 70 is around 60. Okay, so that's how all that works, and that may or may not be what the EPA says. I ignore the EPA because there's different testing methods. It's not very illustrative when comparing vehicles. Okay, so we've got our quiet Tesla, it gets 14.5 kilowatt hours per 100 kilometers. It's highly dependent on speed. If I go 110, 120, we'll see that raised to 17 or 18. This car is a little bit, pays a penalty for the performance wheels and tires, which are not only wider, affecting the aerodynamics, but the sticky performance tread compound also has more rolling resistance. Okay, so the efficiency is broken into about thirds. You'll use a third of it for climate control, power electronics, just keeping the car alive, keeping the cabin warm, the lights, the wipers, all that kind of stuff. A third of the energy goes to that. A third of the energy is going to go to aerodynamics. And aerodynamics is going to be a function of two things. It's going to be a function of the shape of the car, and it's going to be a function of the frontal area. The shape of the car times the frontal area gives you the CD, and Tesla are among the most aerodynamic cars on the road with CDs approaching 0.2. An average car might be 0.3 or 0.32. A truck is like 0.4, 0.45, okay? So these are some of the most aerodynamic cars on the road. A lot of that aerodynamics comes from, or benefit, or the reason the Teslas can be so aerodynamic is they don't have the radiators to cool the combustion engine, and that big hole in front of the car on a combustion engine car doesn't do the aerodynamics any favors. So if you block off the front of the car and smooth the airflow around the car, then that gives you a big difference in aerodynamic efficiency. Okay, so that is 1/3 of the electrical consumption of the car is aerodynamic efficiency. Now the other third is going to be rolling resistance. Rolling resistance is going to be a function of basically a function of the weight of the vehicle and of the tires. So all the electric vehicles, at least with big batteries, are going to be heavy. So the differentiator in that is the tires, and that's why on a Tesla Model 3 Performance, you'll give up probably 5 or 10% with a change to performance rubber. What you really want is a tiny little narrow tire that slices through the air because it doesn't have frontal area because it's narrow, with a really rock hard compound. But then of course your car wouldn't handle very well, and it would be unsafe with close to 500 horsepower. You just spin the tires, and it wouldn't offer you the acceptable amount of grip in braking and so forth. So that's efficiency, and the Tesla nails it from aerodynamics. All cars are going to be virtually the same in terms of the rest of the electrical consumption for climate control and wipers and something. And it's not, this is not too bad with rolling resistance, because it is on the lighter side of an EV with only a 75 kilowatt hour battery. Many cars are up over 100. But the regular Model 3 long range would have a little bit better than this. Okay, so how does it differ from, let's say, my Ioniq 5? Well, it's got a lot more power. The Ioniq 5 was fast, but it had about the equivalent of 300 horsepower. This is closer to 5. And let's also explore why we use horsepower. Well, we shouldn't. We should really be using kilowatts, just because it makes more sense. A kilowatt's basically I think 0.745 of a horsepower. So a 300 horsepower car, any car, even a combustion car, would have 225 kilowatts approximately. Okay, so you can look at horsepower, you can look at power of the car in kilowatts, which then feeds into the consumption numbers that you're using. So if you just use kilowatts for power, you can think, okay, well, how many kilowatts does it take to propel the car at 100 kilometers an hour? Well, about 16 or 17. How many kilowatts total could the car produce? In this case, it's something like 300 kilowatts, a little bit more than that. Okay, so how many kilowatt hours are in the battery? Well, it would if the car uses 300 kilowatts on maximum acceleration, and it's got a 75 kilowatt hour battery, it means you could use maximum acceleration for 15 minutes, right? So if we start thinking about kilowatts in terms of power, of engine power, as well as consumption, as well as storage, everything seems to get easier in terms of converting and comparing, car to car. Okay, so let me just make that point to add to this kind of EV space. Um, and what else can I make? It's not a big car inside, but it's acceptable for 4 people. Some of the other EVs are packaged a little bit differently, but they don't have the aero efficiency, including a Model Y, which is going to be, they call it an SUV. It looks like a car, a tall car. It looks like a car because they're trying to make it as efficient as possible. Tesla really approached travel by EV holistically by making all the cars really aerodynamically efficient and having high power chargers. Together, you can cross the country, in virtually the same time as a combustion engine car. Okay, so there's other EVs that are bigger, but there's a trade-off for that in terms of frontal area, and with that consumption. I guess the big thing with the Tesla is it's very stark. It's very basic. Now, the skeptic in me would just say, well, that's because it's cheaper. and even with the latest Tesla Model 3s, I mean, they took out the stocks, they took out everything. It reminds me of, well, you'll have to be a car guy to get this, but Max Hoffman, when he was friends with Ferry Porsche, and their 356 was quite expensive, and Max Hoffman, who was the importer for North America, asked Porsche for a cheaper 356, cut down. So they took out the leather strap for the wheel, they took out everything they possibly could to the car, and made the iconic Porsche Speedster. Well, Musk is kind of treating his cars like that, and his line was, the best part is no part. So anything he could take out of the car is, not only saves money on that part, but saves money on production line efficiency. There's a whole sort of snowball effect that there is when you have fewer components in a car. So I don't know if he did that just for elegance and simplicity. Well, you could say that too. Or he just did it to take out every single thing he could out of the car to produce it as efficiently as possible, which is probably both are true. But the Model 3 might not resonate with you. You might want your colored cross stitch and your soft touch this, or you might want, who knows, lights in the headliner, or, perfume dispensers, or, whatever some of the high-end German cars get totally carried away. This feels pretty basic, but, I look at it as a tool more than an enthusiast machine. And maybe that's the biggest criticism of the Teslas, is they're a really efficient tool for going from A to B, but do they really excite you the way some of the combustion cars are? And I accept that. I've got some other cars as well that I drive because I like. I have a thing for V12s, internal combustion engines, at least the ones I can afford. A V12 Jaguar, or even my V12 Century, Toyota Century, is a wonderful machine. And I also like my mechanical watch because I like to look at it. Sometimes I wear it, but it's dead until I wear it. The movement starts up again. I don't even mind, just because I like having it on my wrist. My phone and the car tell the time, but I still like the mechanical watch. And so it's kind of like that for me and vehicles as well. This just makes sense. Charging from home is 15, well, I paid 13.5 cents a kilowatt hour. It was, depending on the price of gasoline, and alternately driving my supercharged Range Rover, it's like, up to 1/10 the operating costs. My Range Rover, I calculated at the mileage I do, at $9,000 a year for gas. I have a Toyota Prius as well, and it gets around 4.5 liters per 100 kilometers, and that's I think I calculated that at $2,400 a year for gas, and this is about $700 per year for gas. But actually, I park it in my condo, and the power I use is covered in my my condo fees. So this is basically free, okay? So powering this for me is basically free, and it's $9,000 for the Range Rover. But, tomorrow I'm going camping and I'm pulling a 7,500-pound travel trailer and I'm going into a remote camping spot, and I need an all-wheel drive SUV with air suspension, because I've got almost 900 pounds of tongue weight on the trailer. So for that, I need my Range Rover, and it's the perfect thing. But that's the only thing I use it for, and hauling other stuff. I'm just driving up and down the freeway getting my kids to school or taking them to soccer. I don't need a supercharged Range Rover. So, I think that's really the future of EVs is, driving them where they make sense. No emissions in the city. Forget about where the electricity comes from. I'm not even going to go to that argument. I don't care. It doesn't care where it comes from. It's still better than burning gas. And even just for the fuel savings. So, the electric motor is inherently far, far, far more efficient than a combustion engine. Exploding things is not a good way to make forward progress. You can do it. You can do it. You could light a big explosion and put a sheet of plywood on your back, and it would propel you down the street. And you can, convert an explosion into forward motion. But mostly what you do is you just make lots of noise and create lots of heat, okay? And you waste it. And that's why even the best combustion engines are only 30% efficient, because you make an explosion, and what's an explosion? It's just heat and noise. You just waste it. Electric motors are like 90% efficient. You put the same amount of energy in, and it turns something, and you go somewhere, which is why we don't have gasoline-powered drills or toothbrushes, okay? Like an electric motor makes sense. However, it's limited by batteries and the infrastructure and so on. So we should use what we should all do, I think, in my opinion, is use the electric cars or the hybrids, for use when you can run on electricity and get the benefits, and then use an electric car for everything else. So. Okay, so with that, that's our 2019 Tesla Model 3 Performance. Like I said, I'm driving this car because I want to spend some more time in it, but it will be for sale. Might have a few more kilometers on it, but it's a pretty neat machine, and again, interesting in performance and all that kind of stuff, practicality, usability, efficiency, cost of ownership, all that stuff. It's also really interesting to me is this is like a really important car in the sort of evolution of personal automotive transport. So, I'm kind of glad to at least own it for a while. When you look for a used car, you want some provenance. You want to know kind of where it's been. You want to know if it's been in an accident, particularly. That's probably the most important thing. You want to know if it had any invasive warranty work, like some problems that may not be fully resolved. You would, I would want to know what kind of reconditioning the car has had. Like sometimes, the seats might have marks, and then they're kind of spray painted to get rid of the marks to make them look good in photographs. But the paint that they used is nowhere near as durable as the original coating on the leather, so it comes off pretty quickly. So I'd want to know that. So those are all the things you look for when you buy a used car. Ideally you want a car that's garage kept, one owner, comes from a good home, service history, no paint work, and then this car satisfies all those desires and requirements. Literally, it's almost impossible to reasonably fault. There's a few touched up stone chips. There's a couple pits in the windshield, and otherwise it looks. If you look at this thing from 10 feet away or look at it outside, it looks like a new car. Okay, so that's the Tesla Model 3 Performance. New. This one was pushing 100 with wheels and tires. The MSRP was I think it's 86. The price has come down, yeah, 85.6. So the price has come down $10,000, but again, with the wheels and tires and freight and all the rest of the stuff in GST, you'd still be paying $90 to replace this. Given there's not much to go wrong with the car, the battery health is still, it still shows, I can still charge it to 100. I don't at the supercharger, but at 1 kilowatt, it still goes up to 100, indicating to me perfect battery health, and 2 sets of wheels and tires. You don't have to worry about brakes. There's nothing to service on the car. So I think it makes a pretty compelling and pretty straightforward used car buy. If you wanted an electric car, but didn't really want to spend $100,000 on one, buying one used makes a lot of sense. There's still, they've run these cars for 400, 500, 600,000 kilometers. There's still lots of life in this car. It's barely even run in, basically. Okay, so that wraps up our 2019 Tesla Model 3 Performance. It's a fine car, amazingly fast, costs almost nothing to run, almost no maintenance. Electricity is practically free compared to a combustion car, and I think it makes a compelling used car choice, because maybe you wanted an electric car but didn't want to spend $100,000. Well, now you can get something that's looks virtually new, operates as new, for a fraction of the price. So anyway, we'll be on to the next car, but please like and subscribe. Thank you to Aidan Goss, who's shooting this for me, and thanks for viewing.